Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where movement, mindset, and mastery meet. Join us as we explore the art of living fully with expert guests and real-life stories to inspire your journey. And welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast with your host, Brad Marshall. And today, excited to be joined by a repeat guest, Brannen Dorman, somebody who's been coaching in the space. We got a really great opportunity to look at his story and how he got into coaching and how he helps athletes. He is somebody who is incredibly passionate and focused on masters athletes. And so that is going to be the topic for our discussion for today. We are on the cusp of the games season, or just the season structure in general, starting here in March. So we're really excited. So I figured it'd be awesome to talk to him about what he's learned, some of the best practices and ways that masters athletes might think about training, recovery, and how they can set themselves up for a healthy and a long-term career. So Brannen, thanks for spending some time with me to talk masters athletes today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be back, and hopefully we can get a little golf conversation going on too, because I know the last time we talked a little bit about that after.
That's right. That's part of the masters discussion is we need to be able to do things in the gym, but then still be able to enjoy some life outside of the gym as well. And so you said that you're somebody who's very passionate about masters athletes, and I would guess most of your clients, if not all of them, are in that realm. So what is it about masters athletes or that population that gets you excited or motivates you to work with?
Yes, I would say that probably 75 to 80% of the people I work with now are masters athletes, which has been a huge blessing. I think part of that came, before I answer that question, through working with Training Think Tank and running their master's program. And that was when I had the realization that, man, this is a subset of CrossFitters that I really enjoy working with. And so to answer that question that you just had is I think that the perspective change that happens as you age, partly because most of them either have families, have kids, have a spouse, and they also have full-time jobs that they've been in for a while. It changes the way that they look at CrossFit. So instead of it just being their entire world, it's a part of their world. And I think that little tweak, even for like the young 22-year-old that wants to make CrossFit Games and they know that basically their entire day has to go into training for it, they're not tying their identity to CrossFit. CrossFit's just a part of this broader identity that they have. And I wish that the younger athletes would be able to do that. And it's just much easier to have those conversations with masters athletes. And I've really enjoyed that aspect of it. The other thing too is I think there are some changes that need to happen in programming for masters athletes that I've enjoyed, because it's kind of taken me outside of it just being a performance focused sport and more of a, let me be a holistic coach. How do I talk about recovery? How do I talk about nutrition? How do I talk about warming up and cooling down properly? And the thing that I love to talk about is pacing. Well, everyone needs to learn that. But for masters athletes in particular, when they have a limitation, like they can't get their arms overhead properly for an overhead squat, and they know that portion of the workout is going to be really challenging, we have to come up with a pacing plan that fits their needs. And that's just been a really fun challenge for me as a coach. So kind of all of those things have, I think, helped me be a better coach. And it's also allowed me to really enjoy the masters community.
Yeah, I think that first piece you mentioned, the idea of the mindset and the approach that people take to how they think about CrossFit and training and how it connects to their life in general. I think so many folks, when they're younger and maybe have the time or the energy or whatever else, they can go hard and go for long periods of time. And then all of a sudden family happens, work happens, other things start to pop up, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can be at the gym for 3 or 4 hours every single day. And you still want to stay connected to this thing that you've loved and you develop, strong feeling for, but you start to realize, okay, this is where it fits in the broader perspective. So when you start working with athletes, what is that approach like then? Because I think it helps kind of frame up how much time are you dedicating to training and recovery and things like that. Because if somebody says, hey, I love CrossFit, I want to do it, but I only have 60 minutes a day. How do you figure out and work with folks, especially at that level, and they've got all these other competing priorities around programming and training and what's best for them?
Well, I mean, the first question that I ask is what are the actual goals? And once we identify that, then we figure out how to tie that into the rest of their life. And kind of going back to that first question of having that, almost like a paradigm shift or having a better perspective, is making sure that training, whether your goals are to make CrossFit Games or just you want to do CrossFit because it's fun, is enriching all the other aspects of your life, which I think I mentioned in the last podcast. I kind of try to say that in anything that I do. Like why I coach is to help people become a better person, and training can do that. Like fitness does that. There's a really good tie to everything else that we do. And there's a lot of good research on that, like, how clarity of mind and having the ability to go do other things. Like Glassman talks about that all the time with, like, it's not just being able to do a squat snatch. You do a squat snatch so you can do all these other things in your life. So when I have that conversation with an athlete, I want to make the CrossFit Games, or I want to make a semifinal, or I'm just doing this for fun and I want to be able to do an overhead squat when I'm 60 years old. It still ties back into, okay, well, how do we do this and also benefit all these other things that are going on in your life? And if we can tie that into a 60-minute session, which we can, then that's where we start with a training block. And so for the games athlete, I may ask them, hey, I know we only have 60 minutes in the off season, but as we get closer to the games, we're going to have to add an additional session. And that's just kind of one of the sacrifices that they make for that specific goal. But most people, we can figure out how to identify their limitations, work on the things that they want to work on to reach their goals in a 60-minute window. And that just means we're prioritizing the specific limitations that they have.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, like you said, to highlight the goals, but then also figure out, is this enriching the other areas of my life? Are there certain either questions or things you're kind of keeping an eye out for to see if that's happening? Because I know as a coach and as an owner, you try and keep up with what everyone's doing. And, there's so much going on in people's lives between work and family and this and that. And you're like, oh, they're coming in. Sometimes they're sore. Sometimes they feel a little bit beat up. Are there ways in which you've come to try and identify or ask folks, hey, are we on the right track? Are we still making progress? Is it still helping the other areas of your life, or is this becoming too consuming for you?
Yeah, I think part of that is just an ongoing process of collaborating with your clients. And that's another thing. In the initial conversation that I have with an athlete, I say, this is not me telling you what to do. It's us collaborating to make sure that you're on the right path. And I'm just the guardrails to make sure that you don't fall off the bridge or, go off the cliff, or however you want to say that. And so the initial conversation, I ask them just subjectively, how are you sleeping? What are you eating? Are you tracking your macros? Do you have any aches or pains or chronic injuries that you need to talk to me about? And then through the assessment, which is where I'm going to identify if they have any movement limitations or maybe performance limitations when we get to the CrossFit performance side of the assessment, I'll identify those things and just take notes, maybe not talk to them about them right away, but just kind of like, that's a little red flag. And then in training, the way that I do it is like, if I have a training block written out, each day when an athlete gives me feedback, I'll highlight it as green, yellow, red, and make it really simple, where if it's like they report back, I'm really tired, I had no energy today, I couldn't hit my numbers, that's a red day. If they said I was a little sluggish, but once I warmed up, I was fine, that's a yellow day. And if everything goes well, it's a green day. But if I pull out in the macro view and I'm looking at it in, whatever app, if other coaches are listening that they want to use, if they want to color code that, you can use Google Sheets even, that's super simple. Then I can see if we have 3 or 4 red days in a row, we know they're likely overtraining or they're just under recovering. Those are the same things. And as all coaches out there know, training is only as good as the recovery is, right? If you're not recovering, it doesn't matter how good of a training program that you have, how good your progressions are, how good your skill work is. If you're not recovering between those sessions, you just aren't going to be able to adapt the same way. So I'd rather someone do less and have a bunch of greens and then maybe only a couple yellows and reds in there, because you're going to have those days, to make sure that we're always on like this uptrend. And I always tell athletes too, it's kind of like the stock market, right? Like, especially now, you look at it, it's like going up and down, up and down. But as long as we're like continually going up, we're in a good spot. And that's how I pull back, again, looking at the macro view of, you're going to have those days where that stock market or your body goes down. But we want to make sure, if I look at a week, or I look at 4 weeks, or I look at even a macro cycle, maybe it's 6 months, that the trend is always up.
And I really like that perspective of some targets for people to work towards outside of just, did I do the workout RX? Did I hit a certain number of rounds, reps, weights, et cetera? Because if we are tied to that, that's where the roller coaster comes in. But if we start focusing on, what's my sleep like? What's my energy level like? Do I feel excited to go back into the gym? These other factors can help us kind of weather the storm, especially as masters athletes, when it feels like the ability to recover is a little bit more challenging than maybe it was when we were younger.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's definitely challenging as you get older, and it's challenging for a CrossFitter in general if you're doing a lot of hard CrossFit work, which in particular this time of year, like people are prepping for the open. When this comes out, they'll probably have already done an open workout or two. It's hard to be able to recover properly. And so again, taking that macro view of like how have the last few weeks been gives us a better idea of like really where should their training go and if we should pull back and deload. I think again, the tendency for younger athletes in particular is always to feel like if I don't feel sore, if I don't feel tired at the end of a session, that wasn't a good session. But that's really not necessarily the case. Like, should you push at certain times? Absolutely. But I want people coming into the next day always feeling a little excitement. Like, not every day is going to be perfect, but you should feel excited about going in and you shouldn't have a ton of soreness or aches and pains because otherwise it's going to be hard to create those adaptations that you want.
Yeah. And so that perspective of knowing that I don't have to run myself into the ground just to get the benefits on the other end is a huge mental shift for folks where it's like, I can walk out of the gym, got a sweat in, feel like I got a little bit tired, breathing heavy, but I'm going to be just fine. And I don't have to be laying on the floor, passed out after every class, even as you continue to age. And one of the things I'm curious of, I almost want to run this down two different tracks, because when we think of masters athletes, there's the chronological age, which is, you hit 35. Okay, now you're not a masters athlete officially in the CrossFit world. But there's this other component, which would be what's your training age look like. And I kind of want to run down those two paths. And I want to start with chronologically, they're masters athletes, but training age wise, they're new. So maybe they just found CrossFit in their 30s or in their 40s, or they just started and they're getting the itch, they're getting excited about it. They're like, oh, like the open's coming. Oh, I want to do a local competition. What are some things you've maybe come to understand or seen from somebody who chronologically they're 35, 40, 45, whatever, but training age wise, they're a little bit newer in the sport? Because I know when we see a lot of those types of athletes in our gym setting, because they're coming in looking for health and wellness and just wanting to get in shape, then they get excited about CrossFit. And now it's like, okay, you're just learning out a lot of these movements. You're just learning what it's like to move a barbell, etc. Are there things that you've seen from a young training age, but they're already a master's athletes chronologically, that stand out to you?
Well, I think it's easier to make progress when you have a lower training age. And part of that is just because they're coming in from like a baseline that's like you've done nothing, right? So like if you've never done a back squat before, then you should PR like almost every single week as you go through that. But that doesn't mean that a coach should push them to always PR. You need to make sure that you're building this baseline, this foundation where they're squatting correctly first. Like that's why you would do a movement assessment. Look at their air squat. Okay, they passed the air squat. Go to an overhead squat. Can they hold a bar overhead? Okay, they passed the overhead squat. Now we know we can maybe teach them how to snatch and do some more dynamic movements, and do that with all of your movement patterns and then safely progress them. But also create like these little small like micro goals where they continue to get excited, because that's how you create buy-in. Now, the problem with that, especially with someone that's new to the sport, and because they're always progressing, like they're hitting those PRs every week, it's like the crack cocaine that you want it over and over and over again. And that usually leads to overtraining, because now people are like, I'm progressing in every area, so I can just keep going harder and I'm going to continue to progress. I think what happens typically with someone that chronologically is 50, 55, 60, but maybe only trained for 6 months, is that they end up hitting a wall after a year or a year and a half. And then that's when you start getting shoulder pain or hip pain or knee pain. And then you're really frustrated and it's hard to come back from. So I'm always very careful with an athlete that is new to the sport. And I tell them, hey, you're going to see a lot of progress quickly, but don't always expect this. That we're trying to set some better expectations. And then also, let's not continually chase PRs. Let's make sure that we're moving really, really well. And then the PRs will naturally come, because again, you're learning all these new movements. It's like the first time you've been on rings. Okay, now we have a ring muscle up. Congratulations. Now let's get to 3 and then 5 and then 7, or handstand push-ups, or any of the skills, any of the strength metrics in the sport. We want to work toward all those things. But again, going back to the baseline, make sure that they move really well first. And if they do that, then usually they'll have more success later on.
Yeah, I certainly have seen that too, because as athletes come in and you look around the class and you're like, oh, that person's doing a kipping pull-up. That looks fun. Let me try it. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
We haven't even hung from the rig yet, let alone develop the capacity to do things like that. Or barbell overhead, or, hey, I used to back squat when I played high school football, and that was, 20 years ago. And now all of a sudden they're trying to do things that you got to pull them back. And it's hard because you want them to experience some of the success and the excitement around doing lifts and doing new movements, but you also want to be able to make sure they're moving well. And I think some of that mindset perspective when they're first coming in is the hardest part to work on, especially with some of those folks who start to get really excited about what they're seeing in terms of progress in the gym.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a challenge, but that's why you have that conversation. I think good coaches are continually educating their athletes. And it doesn't have to be, hey, we're going to dive deep into the science and I'm going to tell you exactly everything and every reason why we're doing something. But I do think it's important to give them an outline. Hey, here's what we're working on in the next 8 weeks, and here's why. Here's why we're doing these weird mobility exercises or skilled, drills where we are hanging first, and then we're going to do strict pull-ups next, and then we're going to go into kipping after that. There's a process for this, and here is why. You're giving them the why so that they can create some buy-in too. And if they know why they're doing it, it usually leads to also better progress, right? Because then they know exactly what the plan is for. If you're just throwing someone in the fire and giving them a bunch of drills and they don't know the reason why they're doing them, it's really hard, one, to create buy-in, and two, it's hard to replicate what you want out of that drill if they're just watching a video. At least for most people, there are some natural adapters. Like we see this in the CrossFit Games in the younger division. Some people come in and it's like they just jump up in the rings and they can do ring muscle ups and they can squat 500 pounds and then all of a sudden they're a games athlete. Well, genetically, maybe they're a little bit more gifted than most of us, but I do think the education side of it is extremely important, and good coaches should continually do that. And the other thing, the benefit, at least for me, is if I'm educating my clients, I'm retaining the information, right? It's like, if you really want to learn something, you need to teach it. Like, as you teach it, you may make mistakes, like we all do. Like, I say stuff that's silly all the time, but it allows me to retain that information better. And then it allows me to be a better coach and learn how to communicate better too.
Yeah, I think that's a huge aspect of it is continual communication, educating as much as you can, and then celebrating those wins. Because like we said with the Open, right around the corner, I know we have a number of folks who are going to do the Open for the very first time, and they are a master's athlete by chronological age, and by training age, they're new. They're very new, within a year. So it's that fun dynamic of like, all right, you get to use master's weights for certain workouts or certain scales, but at the same time, like, you're trying to push yourself. You want to see what you're capable of. Your, community's encouraging and pushing you. So it's a really fun time. And it does give people sort of that itch of like, oh, that was pretty cool. Like, is there other ways I can get to that? So I think that with the chronological age being masters, training age being young, we see it some, maybe not as common as what I would say is the other side of the coin, because CrossFit now has been around for 20 plus years. A number of athletes have grown up with the sport or have found it for 5, 10 plus years. So now chronologically, they've hit 35, 40, 45, and training age wise, they've hit 5, 10 plus years in the CrossFit space. What are some of the things that stand out to you that you're thoughtful of when you start to work with somebody who, training age wise, has got some years under their belt and now they're continually progressing and getting older?
Well, this athlete's much harder to work with most of the time because just like I said, it's the opposite of the new person. It's harder to create adaptations. They've already trained for 10 years. They've done squat snatches. They've done the ring muscle ups. They've done the butterfly pull ups or the handstand walk. Like they've tried all these skills or they've already mastered those skills, but they're still looking for progress. And that becomes much harder. They're not coming in at this baseline of they've never done them. And so it's easy to learn, or at least it's easy to go from 0 to 1 strict pull up. Well, if they already have 12 strict pull ups, it's much harder to go from 12 to 15, especially as you age. And so as a coach, it's the same thing. You want to educate and let them know, like, this, there are some benchmarks that we still want to set, but it'll probably be more challenging to be able to get you to that next level. For me, when I'm assessing a master's athlete in particular, but this is true for all levels, all ages, movement efficiency is king in the sport of CrossFit if you are focused on performance. Because at some point you're going to tap out or get close to where it's really hard to make a lot of strength gains or, it really improve your muscular endurance or VO2 max. Like, those things can always go up. It's just harder and harder as you age. And so the way that we can, the lowest hanging fruit almost always is, can we clean up the efficiency of each of these movements? And with masters athletes, that's almost always the case, because I talked about that example of, like, can you get your arms overhead and hold a barbell without like having to hold your breath? Well, there are a lot of masters athletes that are even games level. I've had some that have come to me and they can't hold a heavy barbell overhead without just completely collapsing their shoulder and holding their breath, but they still somehow can get through the workout because they are so fit. So if I'm looking at them, I'm going to actually pull back from doing a ton of overhead squats. And this is the education side. Is, hey, we're going to fix your overhead position and fix that squat position in the bottom of the overhead squat so that you can snatch more, so that you can do overhead squats faster, so that you're more efficient with the movement. Because at the end of the day, you're kind of at the same level as all your peers, but we want to learn how to use less effort per rep so that you're beating them in a workout where maybe like on the physiological side, you guys are all kind of equals, right? And so that's a really easy way to benefit from just movement work and movement efficiency. And then by becoming more efficient, you're losing, or you're not wasting as much energy. It actually can help with local muscle endurance or improving your cardiovascular fitness, because now you're more efficient and you can tap into like that higher threshold in a workout.
Yeah. Are there ways in which you try and help people to get access to those positions? Because I also think about that too, is CrossFit, there's certain muscular groups that get used a lot and things get tighter and sometimes more bound up. We can still do a lot of great mobility work to improve the access to certain positions. You know, you hear from the young age, people like, oh, I wish I would have done mobility work when I was younger or got into things. You know, we look at busy individuals who are masters athletes. Is it really just a matter of they've got to put time in to use mobility tools and drills outside of the training time to get access to some of these positions that either they lost or they maybe never really had access to?
Yeah, it does take time. And that's probably the biggest challenge for a CrossFitter who's used to making a lot of progress. Like, let's say we went back to the newbie. They go through 3 or 4 years where they're just constantly making progress. They learn all the skills, and then all of a sudden they kind of hit that plateau. And now it's like, well, what do I do? Every 2 weeks I was PRing, and now I'm not. And that can be really mentally frustrating. But now we're telling them, hey, it's going to take you 6 weeks to get into a better shoulder position. And every time you do it, you're not going to see any improvement. But if you keep doing it with frequency, maybe we will. That's hard to buy into. But again, that goes back to, as a coach, we need to continue to encourage and educate our clients that some of these things may take time. But yes, the way that I think about assessment or just movement in general is, and I like that you use that term access. I kind of use the same things like movement access, or the ability to get into the full range that allows the athlete to do the movement safely. So if we use that overhead squat example, do they have the shoulder flexion, meaning arms overhead? Do they have thoracic extension? Do they have wrist extension to be able to hold the barbell overhead? And those are just like simple, like, I'm not worried about how much you can do or if it looks pretty. Like, do you just have the range to do it? And if they can check off that box, then we move into movement control, meaning stability. Do they have the ability, the strength in the shoulder joint, in the elbow, in the wrist, in the upper spine, in their hips, if they actually go into a squat, to control that movement well? And if they check that off, which, by the way, a lot of people actually don't have that, and they think that because they can still do it, right? They can do the 135-pound overhead squat, but their shoulder is all over the place. So they're rolling forward and crashing, and they wonder why they're having shoulder pain or wrist pain or whatever it may be. But let's just say they did check that off. And then the next step is movement mastery. And that is just, now can you make it look pretty, and are you efficient? That goes to that movement efficiency side. Like, can you do this in a position that you're using less effort per rep than your peers? Which in CrossFit is actually easier than you think, because most people are moving so poorly that especially on the masters in the age groups, if they worked on those positions, you automatically are, head over heels over your peers. And then the fourth one is movement performance. And this is the CrossFit side, right? Like, so it's this 4-step process of, like, you go from, do you have the range to properly do it? That's movement access. And then movement control. Can you stabilize in those positions? Movement mastery. Can you do that in a non-fatigue state and you're moving really well and efficient? And then performance is, now we're in a fatigue state. We're doing CrossFit workouts. That overhead squat looked amazing when we were just doing it in our warm-ups. Can you maintain those positions for as long as possible in a 15-minute AMRAP? And that's what the best in the sport, the 22-year-old or the 52-year-old or the 62-year-old, do well. And those are usually your games champions.
I love having that progression to understand, and it does help people then to see, oh, I now have access to this position. I didn't have that before. Oh, I can actually put something overhead and maintain that. Oh, I can actually breathe. And then now we're putting it into some kind of a Metcon qualifier open workout, and let's see what happens here. But there's time that it takes to get to those stages, and there has to be some intentional focus there as well. And so having coaches or people who can point out or help you find some of those inefficiencies can allow you to continue to make some of those gains and that progress. And I think along the line of gains, so many times we get really tied to what the weight is we're doing, whether it's 1-rep PRs, 3-rep PRs. And as we age, it's so much more challenging to maintain some of that strength. Are there certain thresholds or age ranges you've seen? Because I think because the sport is still so new, we're seeing incredible feats at a variety of ages. You see games athletes who are now transitioning into masters level and they look fitter than ever, even when they were in their 20s. But then you start to see like some folks like, man, I just can't hit numbers like I used to hit. In the work that you've done with athletes, what have some of the things you've seen around that, especially as it pertains to strength? Because I think that's such a foundational piece to CrossFit, and then how that sort of plays out as you age.
It definitely is harder to gain strength as you age, unless you haven't trained before, like we talked about. There are thresholds that athletes need to hit to be games level in the masters categories or semifinal level. And I have a document that I just track it from year to year. And so I don't memorize those. Typically, if someone comes on and say they're 50 to 54, I'll pull up my document. And when we're having that assessment or that conversation, the initial consult, I'll just say, hey, you should probably need to snatch this if you're a male, or you need to be able to back squat this. These are limitations that you have. This is why we're going to work on it, just to make sure. If they don't have performance goals, I'm less concerned with like how strong someone can be, and I'm more concerned with making sure that they can move well, get a requisite number of like a level of strength, just so that they can do all the CrossFit movements safely. And then the rest of it is just like based on whatever their goals are. Hey, I'm just doing this because I want to be able to pick up my kids and not have low back pain. Then that's going to look different than the CrossFit athlete that says, I want to deadlift 450 pounds so that I can qualify. So, but strength is extremely important. I think that especially for the masters athletes, the stronger you are, the easier it is, because the testing body typically at the games and semifinals has at least one or two like really heavy strength components. And then they also have typically one or two like barbell repeatability components to it that require strength or strength endurance. And if there's 4 out of the 6 tests that require strength or strength endurance, you have to be at the top end of that. And you see this all the time where, maybe the athlete's really good at the open, all of a sudden falls off the leaderboard in semifinals just because they can't squat clean or squat snatch the same load as someone else that's in their age group. So it is definitely a part of an assessment that you need to look at for an athlete. In particular, if it's a games or semifinal level athlete, they have to continue to work on strength. There is a deterioration though from age group to age group. I haven't done the numbers from 23 to 24, but pre-23, if we looked at like 2019 to 2023, from age group to age group, there's like a 7 to 9% drop off in 1RM strength from 35 to 39 to 40 to 44 and 45 to 49. And so you have to expect that. But also this goes back, I know I keep looping back, but to the education side of like when you have an athlete, and I just had this conversation the other day, someone that's aging up and they were frustrated that they're not getting much stronger. But I was like, look, if you can keep that squat clean at 255 pounds, you're actually now in the top 0.001% of your new age group, whereas you were starting to drop off because you were the oldest in your previous age group. So those are also things that athletes need to think about if they want to be competitive. It's okay to just maintain, especially as you get older. If you're 48 and your squat clean's not going up, but it's not going down, that's a good place to be, because when you age up to 50, if you can maintain what you had at 45, you're going to be in a really good spot.
Yeah, I think that's helpful too, to have that perspective shift of sometimes maintenance and just percentage work or whatnot is feeling good, feeling consistent, even if, the 1 and the 3 reps or the 5 reps aren't going up. As long as we're able to maintain, that can be a huge game changer. How do you think about strength training when it comes to percentages or work with athletes? And this is personal experience. I personally don't really like going anything over like 85% anymore. It is just very, very taxing, I feel like, on the body to like bounce back from some of that stuff, especially with some of the core lifts. Olympic lifts are maybe a little bit different. And as I've talked to more athletes, some are different. Some are like, oh, I'm fine going heavy. Some are like, I don't like touching weights over 90% unless it's like a qualifier or 1 rep max in a certain event, just because of risk and this and that. How are ways that you've come to understand or work with your athletes when it comes to this idea of strength training and how close they're getting to 1 reps and things like that?
Yeah. It's certainly athlete dependent in that some athletes like you are extremely powerful. And so your nervous system is functioning really, really well. And so you can tap into, let's say if there's an actual scale, like 100% of your nervous system on most days, and then you're just like completely wrecked afterward. Whereas for me right now, I haven't been doing a ton of strength training. If I went up to a heavy load, like I'm not really tapping into it anymore. And so it's just like, oh, I can bounce back the next day and do it again. But we probably are opposites on some other stuff, right? Like I could go do like a really long, hard, nasty Metcon and I'm wrecked. And then maybe someone that's more powerful, like they feel wrecked for a little bit and they're fine afterwards because they're not tapping into maybe like the aerobic system the same way. And so I think that as a coach, you have to assess what the athlete's strength profile is and what they've done in the past. A lot of, high powered football players or someone that played rugby or was a sprinter, anything like that, they probably don't need to do a lot of heavy 1RMs, and they're probably already pretty strong. And so that they don't need to address that as much. For someone that comes from an endurance background, they probably can do more of the heavy lifting or more auto-regulated heavy lifting. So at least they're getting touches and making progress on that. But again, I usually will do that athlete dependent in the assessment and then with ongoing training. There are some creative ways though for athletes. If there is an athlete out there that feels like anytime they go heavy, they're wrecked, you could try a conjugate style method where you do bands and chains and box variations for, let's say, a squat, so that they're actually still tapping into like really heavy loads, but the barbell loading is maybe only at 85% or 80%, and then they just use the bands for the rest as they kind of break through to stand all the way up. That's a way that you can still get that top end strength, and you're only doing a couple of heavy sets, right? So it's like you could just quickly build to a tough 3 for the day, and then the rest of their strength training could be the dynamic effort work, which is just like, for you maybe it's 2 box squats at 60% with chains as fast as possible off the box with the 1 second pause. And that's a really good way that you can maintain your strength and maintain your speed, which is extremely important for masters athletes, and in particular with the strength endurance work that they have to do for the semifinals or the games. Or you could do auto-regulated work, which has become pretty popular in the sport. A lot of good training groups out there are doing this now, where maybe you give them targets and you just say you're basing this on feel and RPE, so like your rate of exertion, as opposed to it being you have to hit these percentages for the day.
Yeah, I've noticed that in our classes actually, that they do really appreciate that. We typically go off an RPE and loosely associate that with some percentage work for our athletes who know that. But there are certain days where it's AMRAP this, but as soon as you take 2 seconds or longer before like you're trying to work through the next rep, that is your cue to stop. We're not trying to find a failing rep or whatever, but those types of approaches have been really helpful, especially for folks if, you never know how the day before sometimes is going to make you feel the next day. And they come in like, man, I didn't realize yesterday's workout was going to tear me up the way it did, and I still want to get some good work in. Well, now we can work off this RPE scale. We can still hit the right amount of reps. So they feel like they're getting progress in without I'm just going right back into it and, I'm not hitting my percentages, or I start to get in my own head about that. I think
I will say just quickly on that, the same thing's true here though. If it's a endurance style athlete, or biased athlete is probably a better way to say it, like me, I could tap in way more on those auto-regulated sets and wreck myself too. So you just have to, like the athlete, when you're doing that, you just got to be really careful and again educate the athlete of like, hey, we're not truly going to failure here, because I'm like, oh, it feels good, I'm just going to keep going. Whereas a lot of really high-powered athletes, they know like that, this once the speed slows, they stop. But like for me, the speed's like always kind of like that moderately slow, but I can keep doing it, and then the next day I'm wrecked. So it goes both ways, and it's just like that's where a good coach can kind of come in and educate and just say like, as soon as this happens, like have these triggers or cues, that's where you would stop your sets.
Yeah, I like that. Almost like you're giving him some different thresholds to hit. And you're cueing in, is the technique still great? Is the speed still great? All these other factors play a big role in that. The other side of the house, I think that's really popular when it comes to CrossFit, is this idea of volume. Because one is we got to be strong enough to handle certain loads, certain, workouts, all that type of stuff. The other perspective is, well, we have to develop a certain amount of volume to be able to tolerate whatever qualifiers, workouts, etc. are. And volume is kind of one of those, I think, touchy subjects as well, because as we get older, it's like you've got a lot of reps under your belt. And so certain people can tolerate high levels of volume with low weight. Some folks can't. When you start to think about volume and what it does to an athlete's body, or how you start to think about total volume load, are there ways that you think about that as a coach of like, I don't want my athletes doing more than X amount of squatting, hinging, etc.? Or is that kind of dependent on who you're working with and those types of factors?
I mean, some of it does depend on what their goal is. So if someone wants to make the CrossFit Games, the threshold is much higher, right? They may have to be able to do 100 toe to bar in a session or 100 chest to bars in an open workout or semifinal workout, which means they do have to accumulate more volume in their off season and as they peak into the season. But again, if an athlete comes in and says like, I just want to do the open and have fun and be top 50%, well, then their training is going to be a little bit more thoughtful and probably more well-rounded, where they're not doing as much butterfly chest to bar pull-up work or toe to bars or handstand push-ups or other things. And instead, we'll work more on like functional lifts to keep them safe, healthy, and again, be able to play with their kids and enrich all the other aspects of their life, because that's important, at least for me as a coach. When we're looking at volume, I don't think I'm as worried with how much someone does. I'm more worried with how well they recover. So there are some athletes that can do 120, 150 contractions in a day and they bounce back and can recover, even masters athletes. Most can't though. And so a lot of that's going to be writing a program and getting feedback. And just like we talked about earlier with like the, red, yellow, or green days, getting a feel of how they're bouncing back from certain sessions and how many hard sessions they can have in a week. And then just continuing to adjust that as a coach as you get that feedback to make sure you're finding the right balance for that particular athlete. For the open, I do think that people need to be able to do 50 plus chest to bars, 50 plus toe to bar, 50 plus squat contractions. So that's kind of like the baseline that I'll use for most people that are like class or above that want to do the open, just because we've seen way more than that. But like that would be kind of like the bottom threshold. I mean, think about the workouts that have come out, last year, all the snatches and burpees. That was a lot of volume in a short time domain. Or 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago now, it was 110 deadlifts, or maybe it was 100 total deadlifts and burpees. Like that's a lot of volume. And if you're not prepared for it, doing at least half of that, it may wreck you where you're risking injury in the workout. So you still want to prepare your athletes. And it probably is a little excessive for the kipping movements, a little excessive for handstand push-ups, but there needs to be some kind of like minimal threshold that you hit for athletes that are preparing for a competition.
Yeah, I like that perspective of thinking about the recovery aspect. I think as an athlete's training age continues to grow, they start to understand if there's X amount of wall balls in a workout or chest to bar, I know that's probably going to make me be a little bit more fatigued. So just got to be a little bit more thoughtful on that of how I'm going to recover or bounce back. And it's also still a learning process of, oh, now I know that's what this is going to feel like. And it's good to have that awareness, especially as we move forward. So when you start to think about the types of workouts that you program for your athletes, I know, and this is probably based on, being a power athlete, like you said, like I love interval work, and I see that does a lot of great work where it allows people to practice the skill, work on something, get a little break. As a coach, you can kind of monitor and see where they're at.
Yeah.
Are there certain training modalities or progressions that you're a little bit more thoughtful of as people continue to age, or do you still just pull from all the different buckets because you still see such benefit from them?
Yeah. As you get closer to the season, way more CrossFit, even for my older masters athletes, because you have to prepare specifically for what they're going to do, which is just chaos, right? Like that's really what the open workouts are. That's what semifinals are. And so they need to do the chaotic elements that come with the sport, which may not make sense. Like the numbers, the rep schemes don't make sense sometimes, the time domains don't make sense sometimes, and that's okay. Like that's what makes CrossFit fun. So you need to have some doses of that. But outside of that, you can't do it every day. Or I would say you probably shouldn't do that where you're just max effort and it's just always hard AMRAPs or for timepieces. I love the idea of doing intervals or EMOM based work where you can focus on particular movements. We dial in movement efficiency. And then also with intervals, you can adjust the total time of an interval or the rest time or the volume in the interval to work on specific, energy systems, which all of them kind of blend together in CrossFit. But if you did want to do, hey, today we're really focused on just like true anaerobic power, you're going to have a shorter time domain with maybe a longer rest break. If we're doing VO2 intervals, then probably 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, or 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, where it's like this one-to-one work to rest makes more sense for working on that particular target. And so as a coach, you can start writing these interval sessions in, and they may all look like intervals, but they're actually working on different sides of the energy systems or the endurance spectrum, if you want to call it that, or even the same thing with strength, with kind of the strength speed continuum that you have. And you can work on all those things by running them in intervals. I love EMOMs the same way of we can work on that either for, a certain energy system, or I love to use EMOMs for just skill-based work. It may just be you're doing 2 ring muscle ups on minute 1, minute 2 is rest. Minute 3, you're doing 6 kipping handstand push-ups. And then I'll give them cues on that. And it doesn't seem like a ton of volume, but it's like on your ring muscle up, here are the 2 cues that you're thinking about. Driving your hips up, letting your knees and feet drop, and then pull to your shoulders. And the handstand push-up, let's shorten your kip because last week your kip was too far or too long and you were falling off the wall. So those are little ways that you can still improve in the sport, but not absolutely run yourself down by just doing a 10 round for time of 5 kipping hands ring muscle ups and 10 kipping handstand push-ups.
Yeah, I know as a coach and owner, interval style training or EMOMs are phenomenal for class experience as well, because it can allow you to kind of regulate where folks are, how they're progressing, make sure there's enough space and equipment for everybody. So those are a really powerful tool. And then it gives you some of that chance to practice the skills, see if you can do it under some fatigue, which mounts over the course of a workout. And then when you get those moments to do an AMRAP or a 4-time workout or an open style, all of a sudden it's like, okay, I feel confident. I've built up some of that capacity through intervals and EMOMs and et cetera. So I like mixing in both of those. One of the other areas I find, especially with masters athletes, is it seems like you start to deal with more aches and pains and even tweaks or minor injuries. And we joke all the time. I throw my wife under the bus here because I've had the same experience. But the other day she woke up and just did a big stretch overhead and almost tweaked her neck. And she's like, what the heck? I just was stretching, getting out of bed, and a muscle just decided to spasm. And I've had the same thing happen. How do you work with your athletes? Because I think there can be a frustration of man, I'm fit, I'm working out, I'm doing all the things, and sleeping wrong, or just turning my head too fast, or bending over to pick something up, and all of a sudden I feel like I get a little tweak or something nags me. And I feel like we get a lot of that from athletes coming into the gym as well, of oh, this happened to me outside of class, and now it's impacting my ability to work out. Is there any way that you think of things being different, whether it's tweaks, aches, pains, injuries for masters athletes compared to even what you've experienced with some of the younger demographics?
Well, I'll say I've had a similar experience. I've been traveling a lot lately, so staying in some hotels, and I always make the mistake. I should always bring my own pillow, right? It just I know what it feels like. And this was a couple weeks ago. I slept on this pillow. I had no, you lay on the pillow and it's like you're on the bed.
Yep.
No support. I woke up the next day and I felt like my neck was stuck like this. So I understand your pain and your wife's pain. Yeah, I mean, those things can happen to anybody, especially when you're training hard. But I think with masters athletes in particular, I always err on the side of recovery. So if it's going to impact their training that day, let's adjust the training, tweak it a little bit even. I know they still want to do something, and then come up with some recovery protocols for that particular tweak or injury. A lot of times it's my shoulder's bothering me, or maybe it is the neck. I hear the low back or the knee for masters athletes quite a bit. And then we just have that conversation of, okay, how did this happen? Was it just that you did sleep on that funny pillow at the hotel? Or is it something that you've gone overhead too many days in a row and you're overtrained, so we need to dial it back? I always want to try to find that root cause and not just guess on that. But a lot of times it is a guessing game of what's really causing this little tweak that you have. Go back in the training and see what we can adjust for the next couple of weeks. But I try to address that right away instead of say, let's train through it, because that used to be the mentality of every CrossFitter. Hey, your neck's bothering you today and it's a lot of handstand push-ups. Let's just adjust the training. We can do some bike intervals instead, where you still can get a really hard workout if you feel good, otherwise. And let's do some, drills for your neck, or a scapular, or, traps, or whatever we need to do to make sure that we're working on taking care of the neck.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest mindset shifts and things to impress upon athletes as a coach is it's okay if something doesn't feel good. We can adjust. You don't have to do what's written for that day and do it exactly as it's prescribed. Being able to come in and say, oh, this doesn't feel good, or I want to do this, or can I just jump on the bike and do intervals? Absolutely. We just want you moving, because we know that's medicine for the body, and we can find ways to work around the tweaks or some of those things. And then if things are persistent, the nagging, shoulder, elbow, whatever, it's okay, now we might need to take a deeper look at movement efficiency and quality and things like that, and how we're leveraging or using those is big.
Yeah, totally.
Along the piece of that, then, I think about this idea of injury and recovery and whatnot, and we get sort of to the game time experience, whether it's the open, qualifiers, competitions. You're someone who's really passionate about strategy. I'm as well. I'm really excited because we're doing do the workout, watch yourself back, talk it through, give people tips and tricks and all that stuff. And I love dissecting workouts. When it comes to strategy, what are some of the things that come to mind for you, or some best practices that people can take with them? Maybe talk us through like how you look at a workout or how you think about things. I know the Open's coming out. We'll have plenty of insights and tips and tricks, things like that. Or just you're looking at your daily class workout and you're like, hey, I want to give this one a go, and what's the best strategy for me? So how do you think about workouts, or how do you go about identifying strategic areas that people can make improvements?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is the athlete needs to do this throughout the year. At some point in time, you have to start either filming yourself or just taking notes on what your workouts feel like and what was the limiter, so that you can identify what those weak points are for you and what your strengths are. And that's, one of the reasons why I still give CrossFit throughout the year. And I'll tell athletes like, hey, this is a hard CrossFit workout. Build a pacing plan, do it, film it, review it, and then journal on what went well and what went poorly, and then really focus on what were the limiters in this workout. Like, how did you actually feel? And then come up with a better pacing plan. Maybe we don't ever redo that workout. Sometimes we will. Like, if someone really bombs one, I think it's good practice to go back and, okay, let's try it again with a different pacing strategy. But that's the best way to learn. Like, you're exposing yourself to how do you actually get better at a workout that maybe has a bunch of limitations in it for you, or maybe it's a workout that's a home run and you still blow up because you go out too hot, or maybe you pace too much. Like, all of those things can happen. But journaling, video, and review, they're so important for the athlete, and that's one of the things I tell them first. When you get into the Open, I think there's some panic that sets in because you start setting these expectations of you just watch. Like, we're gonna watch again. This will probably come out after the first Open workout. We're gonna watch Rich Froning's doing it, Austin Hatfield, Haley Adams, Roman's doing it. All of these athletes that are like still at the top of their game, which, by the way, I think Rich is going to surprise some people this week. I know it's probably come out after that, but still, we'll see what happens. I could say that, and then we'll see if he can win the workout. Those athletes are on a different level. And even if you're a games level athlete, or even if you're a Masters games level athlete, where they're going to be is probably going to be a little bit higher than most. And so you can't pace based on them. Instead, pace on what your history of pacing and strategy looks like, which is why we always say go back and video review and know exactly what you need to look at. So first step, have that video review, know exactly what you need to work on. Step number 2, when the Open workout comes out, write down all the limitations. Everyone knows, like, if kipping handstand push-ups come out and you only have a few, like, that's going to be a bottleneck for you, then make sure you write that out first. And then come back to, okay, what are my strengths in this workout? Where can I take advantage or separate myself from the field because I'm really good? Maybe it's rowing. It's rowing and handstand push-ups, and you're a really good rower but really bad at handstand push-ups. Okay, now how do I pace this workout to get my best score? And from there, that's when you come up with a game plan and make sure that you have that dialed in. And then what I suggest is go out to the gym, or before your workout, maybe an hour before, you run through some intervals of that to see how sustainable that is based on the time domain. If it's a 4-minute workout, for you, Brad, you just sprint through as hard as you can because you're super powerful and you'll crush it and you'll be laying on the floor afterward. But if it's a 25-minute workout, then all of us are going to have to pace it a little bit more and have realistic strategies. But I always say, pull up the old data that you have. If it is a rowing and kipping handstand push-up workout, and I know I have to do 20 cals every time, what did I do in training 6 weeks ago when I had those 20 cal intervals? Or what's my 2K pace and how would that feel in a 25-minute workout? Oh, I can't do my 2K. Maybe a 5K pace is better because that's closer to that 25-minute time domain. So knowing your numbers, knowing what you've done in the past, knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, all of those things play a role in being kind of that holistic athlete that you want to be, so you can attack those Open workouts.
Yeah, and I love taking that analytical approach to the strengths, the limitations, and then mapping things out from there. I know the low-hanging fruit that I'm always trying to encourage athletes of is, one, what do your rest breaks look like? And they're always so much longer than you imagine. You're like, oh, it took like 5 seconds, and you watch it back and you waited 20 seconds before you jumped up on the rig or you picked up the barbell. So finding ways to maybe minimize transitions. And I know you're a big proponent of it as well, but sets with less rest between them can be a game changer versus feeling like I have to jump up and do 5 or 7 or 10 reps. Jump up, get a couple reps in, and just keep chipping away. There's a few benchmark numbers that I usually hold in my head that I try and talk to athletes about, especially when it's like gymnastic related stuff. If they have some idea of what a max set could look like for them, I usually tell them I'd never want you to go more than 50% of that if we're doing reps And even if it's a
I
dense
like that.
set, we always want to stay smaller, be a little bit more conservative. If it's a workout that there's rounds of it, and every time you get 2 minutes before you got to go back and do handstand push-ups or pull-ups or whatever it is, then you might be able to let it rip because you're going to get a little bit of recovery. But those dense sets, those are always the trap in these open workouts when it's 50 or 60 reps of something. You just feel like you're stuck there forever chipping away at it. But those smaller sets, less transition, less rest breaks, those are going to be big pieces, I think, that can help people, especially in these types of open workouts where you start to see some of those rep schemes come out.
Yeah, and I would add to that too that they need to train that. Having athletes train the smaller sets with shorter rest breaks will help them because it feels people panic if they've never done it before. And they're like, wait, I only get a 3-second break or a 5-second break when they're used to a 20-second break. 5 seconds, to your point, feels like nothing. It's like I just got off the bar and now I have to do another one. But if you start training that way, typically you can go a little bit faster when you actually test the workout. So the same rules apply here when you're doing your pacing strategies in the off season. Come up with a pacing strategy that would look identical to what you would do in the open, which I agree with you. I think it almost always needs to be small sets, shorter rest breaks. And there are a lot of creative ways that you can do that. People can do like cluster style sets where they have descending rep schemes. So maybe it's like, okay, I know I have 15 toe to bar here and I can't do 15 unbroken, but I could go 5, rest 4 seconds, 4, rest 4 seconds, 3, rest 4 seconds, 2, rest 4 seconds, 1, right? So each one I'm chipping away and I get through them. And then I can move on to the next movement and I can come back and do the same thing, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the next round, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whereas what happens, I think, for most people, to your point, is they'll start with a 12. They still can't do 15 unbroken, but they'll do a 12 because that felt pretty good and then do their 3. But then the next round, they can only do 4 or 5. And then they do have to take that 20, 30-second break because they're already blown up. And I get it. I still fall into this trap because it's like, man, I feel pretty good. I'm going to do this 15 unbroken. But even for the best athletes in the world, if I have a games athlete, an individual games athlete, and they could do 50 unbroken toe to bar, if there are 15 in a round, I'll still encourage them, hey, think about breaking this. It's only going to take you 2 or 3 seconds, but you kind of alleviate some of that just tension that you would have otherwise. And you have to think about compounding fatigue in the rest of the workout. If it's toe to bar, hang clean, and rowing, everything is a grip limiter. And eventually that will catch up to you. And as we know, being able to kick at the end of the workout really matters for most athletes in the open. You can move up the leaderboard a ton when other people are staring at the bar if you're fresh. So maybe you're behind a little bit on the first couple of rounds, but you finally catch up because you just keep that same round split every single round for a 15-minute workout.
Yeah, I love those different rep schemes and playing around with them and trying them out. And then I would encourage as well, if you've got a coach or a judge who you trust, make sure you let them know what some of your strategies or ideas are before you're going into the workout of, hey, I want to do these toes to bar in these breaks, and I would love for you to try and hold me to this type of rest break. So, as you get fatigued in the workout, it's hard for you to keep track of, was that a 4-second break or a 6-second? But if your judge is sitting there, 3, 2, 1, jump, and they can help you through that, that can be a really powerful way then to help you kind of tune out of some of the analytic side of how long are my rest breaks and what am I doing versus just let me just execute and be told what to do and just keep it going. So I like some of those strategies, especially as we get around the open here. A lot of athletes will be asking their coaches, what should I do? How should I attack this? And it's a back and forth. What are your strengths? What are your limitations? And then how do we set you up for success? I really, I love all these different perspectives on masters athletes, from chronological age to training age to strength to volume to recovery and dealing with injury and strategy. It's a whole new landscape, it feels like, because so many athletes are aging up and it's such a huge demographic. When you look at open participation, when you look at local competitions, it's a very big growing demographic and community. So it's a really fun one to serve. Now that I'm in it, it's even more fun to kind of play around with it and understand it a little bit better. And Brandon, it's awesome to hear your perspective and how you're impacting and working with masters athletes. So for anyone out there who's interested in connecting with you to coach them up or maybe get some more insight into how they can improve as a masters athlete, what are the best ways to reach you?
Yeah, they can just reach out at Brannen Dorman on Instagram. Happy, even if you just have a question about pacing strategy, masters athletes, anything like that, especially around the open, I'm happy to answer those.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Great catching up with you again. We didn't get to that golf conversation like we were hoping, but we got a 70-degree day here, so it
I
is
know,
on
we got to
top
go
of my
play.
mind. All right, we'll catch up
Thanks,
with you
Brad.
soon.